Yellow Wallpaper is a short story written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It tells the story of a woman's descent into psychosis while undergoing a rest cure shortly after giving birth, where she was forbidden from doing anything, including the things that she loved, such as writing. Being diagnosed with a nervous prostration by her husband, who is also a physician, an imbalanced relationship is set in place from the start, with the unnamed narrator invalidated and dismissed at every turn. She is bothered by the yellow wallpaper in the room she is confined to at first, but eventually becomes obsessed with it. She begins imagining that there is a woman trapped in it that she must free. On the day that she was supposed to be released from her treatment, she ended up ripping the wallpaper from the walls, successfully freeing the woman as she hysterically declared that she and the woman were free at last. This story has become one of the most notable pieces of feminist literature in history, as it shows oppressive gender roles and expectations of women, along with the devastating consequences inadequate mental health care and the misdiagnosing of patients can have. While researching the yellow wallpaper, I ran into a couple of different literary critiques that made some interesting points. In Julie Dock's work of literary criticism, she evaluates the different versions of the yellow wallpaper that have been reprinted throughout the years. She focuses on the misspelling of words and the omission of entire sentences, which she argues changes the meaning of the story. She calls out that some versions of the story have the narrator say, "One expects that in men," versus "One expects that in marriage," when dismissed by her husband, which can have a drastic effect on what the narrator means. Throughout the story, the narrator speaks of what her husband thinks as of the way things are, a voice that cannot be challenged. If the narrator were to say, "One expects that in men," the reader would now believe that she thought men were naturally dismissive as a whole, rather than just her husband, which changes the narrative and plight of the main character entirely. Dock points out that many literary criticisms to date need to be reevaluated based on which reprinted version of the story it was written on because of this. In Susan Lancer's work of literary criticism, she asserts that virtually all discourse surrounding the yellow wallpaper is told through a white academic lens. She argues that the widely accepted belief that the story showcases a universal woman's voice needs to be evaluated once more, as the narrator is a middle-class Anglo-Saxon woman. She goes over the time period in which the story was written, where anti-immigration sentiments were high and Jim Crow laws were still in place. She explains the history in which anyone other than of Anglo-Saxon descent was called yellow. After explaining this, she then argues that the yellow wallpaper in the story now has a politically charged meaning and is not arbitrary by any means. She shares that Charlotte Perkins Gilman's later works included ideas about eugenics as a way to support her claim that the story was written to project resentment towards the patriarchy onto a quote, quote, yellow woman, and that the narrator wanted to free her from it. I personally found this theory to be very interesting and surprising, as it challenges the widely accepted belief that this piece showcases a universal woman's voice, as seen in many circles regarding feminist literary criticism, like I mentioned before in the previous slide as well. Lancer's argument that the yellow wallpaper actually symbolized a woman that isn't white is convincing, especially when she brought up that Gilman claimed to have related to the unnamed narrator, but not the yellow wallpaper itself. She had gone on record to mention that a few times as well. Reading about the racist ideas Gilman had and wrote in depth about in her later years as well made it feel likely that the yellow wallpaper represented more than what I initially thought. Now that we've gone over a little bit about the yellow wallpaper and the various literary critiques that were made in response to it, I would like to touch briefly on the historical context in which this story was written. In this excerpt from a book that was published in the same year as the yellow wallpaper, 1892, Anna Julia Cooper explains her belief that women have much to give to their nation beyond the standard of only contributing to the domestic sphere and being desirable to men. She shares that women can pursue a higher education and can help with bringing balance to institutions that need reforming. She urges people to accept women's desire for growth and to be individuals without being berated or ridiculed for it. At this point in history, women were not allowed to vote. Not only that, but their rights were not equal in the eyes of the law, and many were not allowed to do anything without going through their husband first. It is hard to imagine a world like this in today's day and age, and it makes me wonder that if women were equally respected as men in this time period, would the narrator in our short story have felt more confident to share her ideas and have them validated in return, preventing her mental health from getting worse? Shifting from the overall historical background and ideas surrounding gender at the time, I would like to talk more about the author of this story herself, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. In Cynthia Davis's biography about her, she shares that Gilman's father left the family when she was just an infant, leaving her mother to provide for her and her older brother, where they lived in poverty. Her mother was not affectionate as she focused on ensuring the family's survival, moving 19 times within a span of 18 years seeking aid and opportunity. This caused Gilman to resent maternal expectations and long for the personal and intellectual freedom her father's side of the family enjoyed. However, just as she began to solidify that she wanted to devote her life to serving people and explore her own ideas, she soon married and had her first and only child. Struggling with debilitating mental illness, she went to undergo a rest cure, which became the inspiration for her famous work, The Yellow Wallpaper. Eventually, leaving her husband to serve all humanity rather than just one man, she prioritized her career and pioneered feminism through her writing and through delivering speeches. However, eventually being diagnosed with breast cancer during the Great Depression in the 1930s, Gilman unfortunately took her own life. This biography helped with understanding what events led to the creation of the yellow wallpaper, along with what came afterwards in her life. Something that surprised me during my research is that this also showcased some of the moral downsides of Gilman, such as the fact that she favored the idea of eugenics and had xenophobic tendencies. In a literary critique that I mentioned earlier, this was also shown in the text. So it was interesting to see it come up again, especially in a biography setting. This shows that although she was a pioneer in feminism, she also harbored a controversial and contradictory worldview. Nonetheless, her ideas on gender roles and economic independence inspired feminism for years to come. An antagonist of sorts, often mentioned by Gilman in her lifetime, also known as the physician who prescribed her to undergo the notorious rest cure in the first place, is Silas Weir Mitchell. In a book written by Helen Horowitz, she describes the treatment methods and ideologies of this particular doctor. The rest cure method involved complete bed rest, where patients were not allowed to move on their own or be spoken to by anyone other than their doctor. Nurses and masseuses were instructed to flip the patient to prevent bed sores and massage them rigorously for digestion. They were also fed every 2 hours with meals consisting of raw beef, butter, wine, and malt extract as a means to quote, quote, thicken the blood. In regards to his personal beliefs, Mitchell disagreed with the cause of women's suffrage and women's colleges, holding other misogynistic ideas about the correlation between education and being physically unfit to perform duties as a woman. Mitchell would condemn the hysteria that he treated in books such as Fat and Blood and How to Make Them, saying it to be a form of moral degradation. He emphasized the need for self-control and that negative emotions were to be avoided in the treatment of ailments such as neurasthenia. Knowing this, it makes me wonder how he became a celebrated physician in the first place. This brought me to David Schuster's article. In this peer-reviewed article, he examines the life of the celebrated neurologist, where I was surprised to learn that he was also an author, a public lecturer, and a regional celebrity in his own right. He explains that Mitchell first invented the rest cure after successfully treating an anorexic woman with it. Schuster also observes the lives of two of Mitchell's patients who underwent treatment, such as critic and historian Amelia Gear Mason and writer and homemaker Sarah Butler Wister, along with the successful effects his treatment had on them. Notably, they did not undergo Mitchell's famous rest cure, as this was typically reserved for his most serious cases of neurasthenia. Instead, he assisted them with counseling and prescribed breaks in daily activity. Mason's treatment proved to be beneficial for her as she found new purpose in becoming a critic. Wister's treatment aided in finding balance between the domestic sphere and herself. Schuster also describes the notorious encounter between Charlotte Perkins Gilman and Mitchell. He emphasizes that treatment is best applied when there is positive rapport between doctor and patient, something that did not exist between Gilman and Mitchell. I personally found these sources to be beneficial in my research about the yellow wallpaper because it provided more of an idea of what the rest cure actually was and a different perspective regarding Mitchell's treatment methods. Reading about how Mitchell misinterpreted Gilman's mind to be the cause of her illness rather than the solution was also interesting. Gilman had initially written out the complete list of what she was experiencing and thinking regarding her neurasthenia, only for Mitchell to dismiss it and call it an act of quote, self-conceit. This shows that the relationship between doctor and patient was tense from the start, laying the foundation for what would later become the yellow wallpaper. Not only is a positive relationship between doctor and patient important for treatment, considering the unique intersectional identity of the patient is crucial as well. In an article written by Camille Viller, she describes the multifaceted identity of the unnamed narrator in the yellow wallpaper. She describes the narrator as being a woman, a wife to a physician of high standing, a writer, and reasonably wealthy. She also desires to be a mother to her newborn child, but her disabling mental illness has limited her ability to provide that kind of care. Viller asserts that the physician's dismissal of the narrator's unique needs is why the treatment failed. She also describes the unhealthy power dynamic between the narrator and her husband, a physician, that ultimately contributed to the narrator's demise. After shedding light on the importance of considering intersectionality and unique identities, Viller calls for the need to consider how treatment methods will affect someone based on their gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and disability. She asserts that assuming one treatment method applied to all people would ultimately become more costly and ineffective in the long run, citing two studies that were done that prove this to be true. I found this article to be helpful in my research as it describes a timeless issue affecting people, which is that a treatment plan can be harmful to a patient if all unique aspects of their identity are not considered. Viller did an excellent job in contrasting the rest cure, which was once a widely accepted treatment method, with clinical research practices in the modern era, highlighting the negative impact overlooking certain populations can have and cautioning for history to not be repeated. I appreciate how this article focused on the need to create care based on a patient-centered approach. This relates to the yellow wallpaper because the narrator is repeatedly dismissed and told that she is, getting better, even though she feels unwell. If the narrator's concerns along with her unique identity were considered, she may not have fallen into such a severe case of psychosis. From learning of the different theories and approaches regarding the symbolism and meaning of the yellow wallpaper, exploring the life of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, examining the approach of Silas Weir Mitchell, and going over the importance of intersectionality in clinical treatments, researching this short story had so much to offer beyond the horror felt during the first read-through. Overall, it leaves an impact on my understanding in not only why it became a staple in feminist literature circles, but the real-life lessons that it had to offer in showing the importance of female autonomy and validating women's experiences and the harmful effects of the patriarchy.